Hi, this is Paul. I've been doing a bunch of stuff on the Emergent movement, and I thought for illustrative purposes, I might show a few things that illustrate the movement that has taken place in church. Now, with just about everything else, this movement is not even. There are still many churches and many places in the country where the seeker movement is still holding on, especially in sort of its technical managerial mode. And one YouTube channel where you can find this would be the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. And when I see a title like that, it's just like, wow, I feel like I'm back in 1997, because back in those days, as I mentioned before, every church in our classis went to the Willow Creek Leadership Summit, including me. I was fresh back from the Dominican Republic, and back in the United States, and sort of I grew up with my father's ministry in Patterson, and then my church in Grand Rapids, which was Madison Square, and Dave Beelan, he's been on the channel. And then I was overseas in the Dominican Republic, and I was doing all that, and I come back and it was like, whoa, what oh, the leadership, business, managerial, CEO, pastor, all of these things. That was a huge deal. And in many ways, the Emergent movement was a big reaction to that. And as I mentioned before, you have sort of the progressive evangelicals who grew out of the left wing of the Emergent movement. You have the young, restless, and reformed who sort of grew out of the right wing of the Emergent movement. And we might say that the Tradcaths and the Orthos grew out of the far right, or who knows where, part of the movement, because I don't think you can understand the surge in traditional Catholicism or Orthodoxy today without appreciating the Emergent movement. And if you want to get a sense for the Emergent movement, I'm just going to play a little bit of this video. And it isn't so much about what they're talking about, because in many ways, my go-to Tim Keller clip I got from this channel, the Carey Nieuwhof thing. And I'm not skeptical about learning to be a better technocrat as a church pastor, but that's embedded in a particular cultural frame. And the crisis in evangelism is a real crisis. Churches aren't growing. Churches aren't doing evangelism. And these people want to treat that. So you've got the Barna Group. The Barna Group, they were a staple of that period. And again, this was exactly what the Emergent movement grew out of. So let's just play a little bit of it. And again, the Orthodoxy is very excited about doing evangelism, and that's, in traditional Catholicism, when their churches grow, they're very excited about that. And the Anglicans everybody's excited to have their church grow. And the evangelicals, the neo-evangelicals, were very serious about this, and used business practices and marketing and psychology and sociology. And again, as I've described, you sort of have this embroidered Amazon box brick that is the gospel, and you can dress it up however you want in order to deliver it to a particular group of people. So I'm going to play this, and I want you to, if you can possible, to just sort of separate out the message from the vibe. And again, you can't really fully do that. The medium is the message, yada, yada, yada. I get it. But pay attention to the vibe, and you can see how, again, this vibe hasn't gone away. It is still a very big part of especially professional Protestantism today.
The reality is our Christian ecosystem has to stay alive somehow, right? And we've built a model that is very dependent and is fragile if we don't have these things. And it may cause us to overstate things that aren't true.
Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. Hey, today we are going to talk about the dismal state of evangelism. And I'm sitting down with...
And just the vibe. We have the upbeat music, the sort of music. Hey, today we're going to talk about the dismal state of evangelism. Millions of people going to eternal conscious torment. Unless you're Luke Thompson, in which we're not quite sure where they're going to. Maybe just millions of years of purgatory. So, but that's the vibe. And it was managerial, it was American, it was suburban, it was sort of like the shopping mall. And a whole bunch of you I know that listen to this program, this is exactly why I am never going back to a Protestant or an evangelical church. I mean, it's right here, or any church at all. Just the vibe will just send you running for the hills.
Barna president David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock, an author, speaker, thinker, author of Faith for the Curious. And we're going to talk about why most churches really are not that good at evangelism. And this episode is part of a 5-episode series on the 5 disruptive church trends.
And again, always the listicles with the seeker movement, 5 disruptive church trends, 10 ways to grow your church, 4 ways to keep your kids from doing this or that, six ways for more wisdom. So if you went to a seeker church in the late 1990s, they were always preaching on Proverbs, because the idea was you have to impress them with your wisdom. And once you impress them with your wisdom, maybe they will listen to you about the worldview question and deliver the gospel medicine to you with this wisdom sugar, and it'll help the medicine go down, and you'll be impressed by this, and you'll decide to do this. And it was, and continues to be in some places, a tremendous success, because people's lives are a mess and they don't know how to do anything. So you could go to a mega church and learn to manage your money, or learn how to raise your children, or maybe they had a Christian school, which was better than your public school, or they had perhaps counseling there on site so you could, do better in your marriage. And it sort of gave the church and the minister an air of authority. You had a coffee shop right there. You had all of this. But again, a whole bunch of you are thinking, yeah, that is exactly what I ran away from. Now, I have to say that I appreciate it. You're watching this channel. Some of you have watched me for years. I get it. There are a lot of Americans that this works really well for. It helped them get their financial house in order. It helped them improve their marriage. It helped them improve their parenting. If you look at High on God, a book I talked with the author, Tripp's uncle, James Wellman, about, he wrote this book, and he was a little salty about the fact that Jesus and John Wayne sold so well. He was much more sort of a mainline person and an academic, and he studied, and he said, you know what? These mega churches, they actually do real work. They actually help the poor. They actually improve people's lives. They actually do really well in terms of evangelism. And you might tell jokes about smoke machines or skinny jean preachers, but you know what? These churches do work, and these churches bring in people. And you can criticize this all you want and say the kind of wisdom that I want looks like long beards and dark robes, and it's got to have something ancient, and if there's some chanting and some icons and some smells and bells, I'm there. This stuff gives me the hives. Hey, fair enough. But this stuff actually helps a lot of people become Christians. And in terms of many of the Randos conversations I've done with people, this type of church helped your parents become Christian and gave you something to rebel against so that you could get into Orthodoxy or traditional Latin Mass Catholic, or some, really nerdy, young, restless, and really theo-bro church. So, again, you might think, well, I'm slamming these people. I'm playing Christian YouTube and I'm saying they're out of line or out of bounds or blah, 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 blah. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying everything has a culture, and the cultures always matter. And for an enormous pluralistic population like we have in the United States and the rest of the Anglophile world or Anglo-speaking world, for example, in the UK, I've got friends in the UK that these churches do really well. And I think it was Louise Perry said, basically what I see, there's 2 kinds of churches that are really going right now. Your big box, expressive worship, evangelical, multi-everything church, or your neo-sacramental, ancient, modern, ancient, but we're not really going to talk about the ways that we've really adapted. I'm going to make another video about that because I've got about 4 videos on my mind today. And so they might not be real long, but there might be a whole bunch of stuff coming through the channel. So, well, let's just finish this because I want to get to the ad, because again, when I listen to this, it's like, oh wow, I so remember those days. I so remember reading those business books. I so remember going to those leadership conferences, and I can go all over Sacramento and find churches using these methods, and they are not dying. They are growing. They are helping people. They are doing good work.
That will rule 2025. And to go along with the series, I've got a free leader guide, which includes all 5 trends in detail that you can download.
Here we got the videos, and here we got the book, and pretty soon we're going to have the group, and you can sign up for, and you can pay for, and you can get...
Download at 2025churchtrends.com. Again, that's 2025churchtrends.com. Like, subscribe, leave a comment to join in the conversation about the principles we cover in the interview. And now a word from today's sponsors, and then we'll dive into my conversation with David Kinnaman and Mark Matlock.
And again, Kinnaman, I mean, he's written quite a few books. He sort of picked up the business after Barna. And again, I'm an old dude. I was still around when Barna was writing the books.
This episode is brought to you by the Highly Productive Leader Challenge. So let's be honest, how has 2025 been shaping up so far? Well, if you're like a lot of leaders, the busyness of ministry.
And remember, what was really nice about that Emerged podcast is the first one started by saying, and of course this is for old dudes like me, do you remember back when your church only had a fax machine and there was no internet, and every week or every month you would get a fax from like leadership.net? I think that's eventually where they went. And all of this stuff about 5 ways and this and that, I'll just play this out, but you get the vibe.
Has already taken over. New Year's resolutions are slipping. Everybody kind of forgot about that. Your calendar's packed. And there is no difference between this year and last year. Well, here's what most leaders get wrong. You don't have to wait until next January to fix this. So I decided to come in on February 3rd with a 4-week highly productive leader challenge. It's specifically designed for leaders like you who feel stuck in the cycle of overwhelm. Now, this isn't about sprinting at an unsustainable pace. It is about breaking free from the patterns that keep you too busy so that you can do what matters most.
Now, what's amazing about something like this is if you just change a few little key words, you could be selling this to the managers at the local McDonald's, or the middle management at your multinational hub where you're doing widgets and formulas and business and this and that. I mean, that's the ethos of this. And again, it is just plain true that if you have a church that's bigger than 100 people or 200 people, you're going to want some of these skills. You're going to want to maximize your time. You're going to have to, I mean, for me, even just my tiny little church and this crazy other stuff that I'm doing on YouTube, time management is something I'm continually thinking about. Where do I spend my time? Where do I put my efforts? Who do I spend time with? And I'm sort of more emergent in that I want to spend some of my time on managerial things, but those are sort of the least attractive parts of my job. I'd much rather write a sermon. I'd much rather make a video, much rather go out to lunch with Freddie. But this whole managerial thing, and part of what's interesting is that, as a nation, in terms of the vibe shift with the Trump election, it was, I can play some of this. This debate that Unheard had about, whether or not Trump 2.0 is good for the UK. That was a fun video. I mean, Peter Hitchens is always great to listen to. Mary Harrington's great to listen to. James Orr's in there, and another guy, I didn't know who he was. And it was just super interesting and helpful getting these divergent opinions on Trump. And Mary Harrington is, oh gosh, how articulate is this woman? But but she sort of nails the vibe change in terms of the turn away from the managerial
form of goodness which conservatives actually supposedly support. So I think
I'd like to respectfully, very respectfully, because I'm a huge fan, Peter, disagree with Peter on Donald J. Trump as a conservative. I don't think he's a conservative. I welcome Trump the Trump era, not because I think it's going to be a particularly conservative era. It's certainly not fascism. It's not even really conservatism. It's mercantilist in a very 19th century sense. And I think most of the oligarchs standing behind him, the big tech guys, very, very, to some people ominously in the photograph behind him, would see themselves very much as sort of buccaneering entrepreneurs in the 19th century mercantilist age. You know, they're hungry for a new Gilded Age, and which I suspect Aaron is probably not very keen on, and I have mixed feelings about. I'm honest about that. However, I have a great many reasons to welcome the Trump era, and it's not just because he's not a progressive. He's fundamentally a liberal, Donald J. Trump. Yes, he's coarse. Yes, he's a caricature of a certain type of Americanness. And that just is what it is. But he's human. He's not the swarm. He's not the managerialist swarm fronted by a dead-eyed, shambling, and adrenochrome hopped-up golem. You know, that's...
There it is. There it is. Hear that? Because that's exactly the kind of church. You know, I'm thinking about McMo. I'm thinking about a bunch of the guys in the TLC that got bounced by this kind of church.
I think he's not the swarm. He's not the managerialist swarm fronted by a dead-eyed, shambling, and adrenochrome hopped-up golem. You know, that's. I think this is even on that basis. Isn't it?
And so it's, you know, the caricature of the mega church is. It's just this What did she say? It was so darn good. She's just so darn articulate.
Not the managerialist swarm fronted by a dead-eyed, shambling, and adrenochrome.
The managerialist swarm. Got to write that down. So here, you know, busy pastor, you've got way, you know, especially if your church is paying for it, you got way more money than time, and you just have to, if you can improve your efficiency, if you can improve your effectiveness, if you can improve your productivity, if you can get your sermons started earlier, and you can keep your council happy, and if you can do all of this, then you can grow your church that next 5%. And I remember going to one thing where you have to turn up your evangelistic temperature 1 degree. I was sitting back with a bunch of other pastors who were much more on the emergent scale as I was, who just heard that and just, oh gosh, managerialist swarm.
Most. Through on-demand learning, group accountability, and live coaching with me, you will gain practical tools to finally get ahead on your priorities and start feeling inspired, not rushed. You'll be able to reclaim time for your family and personal life and make real progress on your goals without burning out. And each week, in just 60 to 90 minutes per week, you will take the steps toward becoming the leader you've always wanted to be: productive, impactful, and present. So it's not too late yet.
Productive, impactful, and present. I love that. Great alliteration. It's just boom, boom, boom. And again, I got to be really careful because I know a bunch of you are just, oh, it's the managerial swarm. This is going to make a great thumbnail. But hey, again, lots and lots and lots of people, this is their church. Now, can you critique it? Can you criticize it? Sure. But the thing is, like I was thinking, I don't have one cooked up, but I should be able to go to a Daily Wire video of Jordan Peterson and watch them hawk Exodus 90. So you're going to turn off the screens, and you're going to slow down, and you're going to journal, and you're going to take cold showers, and you're going to meet with a spiritual partner or mentor or one of these guys, and blah, 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 blah. Because the truth is that whole shtick is getting refined too, and it's just sort of ancient modern. So then I'll go serve this one up for me: How to Practice Christian Mysticism for Normal People with John Adams.
Last year I found an awesome ancient source that I'll tell you about that actually gives clear instructions for some aspects of practicing the mystical.
Now, if you said, I'm going to give you an ancient source that has 5 clear ways where you can up your mystical temperature by 3 degrees in the next 3 months. No, he's not going to say any of that, but there's still all this sort of, we're going to have our mystical code talk now.
Path, which is something that I was looking for a long time. And we'll talk about what that source has to say about the 5 things that any aspiring mystic, even you and me with our busy schedules and all our responsibilities, 5 things that you and I can do every single day to walk the mystical path and to cultivate our intimacy with God. So let's get to it. The 13th century Syriac writer Bar Hebraeus writes that true mystics do not debate points of doctrine or quibble over words. True mystics speak of behavior only. Part of what first drew me to the Christian mystical path was that it's a path of action. I know that the word mysticism feels very esoteric and even passive, like we're going to sit around meditating all the time. But Christian mystics from the very beginning have always been very active people. The first desert monk, Anthony, was a wealthy young Egyptian man. And he heard a sermon once about what Jesus said to the rich young ruler, to go and sell all of your possessions and give the money to the poor. And Anthony felt conviction, like Christ was speaking directly to him.
Now both cultures have their things on top. And it's like, I want to be a CEO pastor. I want to take my church from 200 to 1,000 in 2 years, and then from 1,000 to 5,000 in the next 5 years. And after 20 years, I'll have a 15 or 20,000 member church, and I'll be speaking at the leadership summits, and I'll be traveling around the world, and I'll be helping to plant churches and other places and make a prevailing church where people can have a safe space to hear a dangerous message. I mean, I know all this talk. What was interesting, but this is so much, I don't care if the church only has 20 people in it. It would be really nice if we had $1 million worth of marble, but I'll wait on that. I'll get the baptismal trough from the farm supply store. But what's really important is that now this is what's interesting, because lingering in the background is this observation that Charles Taylor made between 1-speed and 2-speed religion. Because what this whole video is about how you can have a wife and kids and a job and a vacation and a pension, and you can be a mystic. Used to be, you're either a serf or you're a mystic. And the mystics do the praying for the serfs. The serfs don't do a lot of praying because the serfs are growing the food and bringing in the food and doing all those things and having the babies. The mystics are doing it. In other words, it's much more of a communitarian thing where it's like, okay, you do the praying, I'll do the working. But now everybody should be a mystic. And we're really sort of in early Protestantism when we do that. Now, I'm not saying, I'm going to make a video that's going to even be a little bit more touchy on this whole Protestant, non-Protestant thing, but this is the way in which a lot of these ancient fights sort of blend and dissolve, and it's really hard to say, well, is this a Protestant project? To have all of your people be mystics? To have all your people say the daily office? I mean, it used to be, well, the monks they're maybe making their beer or making their wine, and they're living in community, and they're not having sex with their wives because they don't have wives. But there are a few orders that you could be married in, and so on and so forth. But there's a real vibe shift here in terms of a whole lot of things. And again, I'm not being cynical about either the seekers or the mystics. And to go back to the video I made a little while ago when I looked at, well, I could bring in Chuck Colson and say, I could take a lot of what he's talking about and say, you're really talking about a personal relationship with God. Now, this is a book that I've pulled out before. It's called Space for God. And this was done by Christian Reformed Publishing, Bible Way, Grand Rapids. Date is 1983. So this is sort of even the acceleration days of the seeker movement, the end of the 70s. And this is all about, look, you've got art, you've got poetry, you've got a big format book. And this is sort of the height of, Christian Reformdom in many ways. CRC is not quite at its peak in terms of people. You have sayings. Whoops. Okay, there we go. You have sayings from the Desert Fathers, and this is all about how, actually, the man who wrote this book, he was at a church I interviewed in, and his daughter was my high school English teacher. And this book was all about how your everyday Christian Reformed person could be a mystic. And you might say, now, we never used that word because that word in the 1980s, for the majority of Christian Reformed people, that would have sounded papist. Mystic? That sounds so Catholic. But there's been a constant element of this in the Christian Reformed Church and in many, many other denominations for a very, very long time. And so here's a Van Gogh picture. You've got Desert Fathers. You got Psalter Hymnal Supplement. You got Henry Nouwen, Roman Catholic, Dutch Roman Catholic. Yeah, we'll let the Roman Catholics in if they're Dutch in the CRC. Again, more Van Gogh and some Rembrandt. Pretty Dutchy. Another Van Gogh. Yeah, very Dutch. But you got Desert Fathers in there. You got Dutch Masters. So here's another. Try to not waste too much of your time. Yushi Numa, Desert Wisdom, Sayings from the Desert Fathers. And this is about the time in my own. So this was 83. So I was still sort of a college undergrad. But once I got into seminary, this was hot stuff. All the cool kids at seminary, we were meditating and we were doing the daily office, and we were just putting on our little Calvinist mystical thing on the Desert Fathers. As he was dying, Abba Benjamin taught his sons this: do this and you will be saved. Rejoice always, pray constantly, and in all circumstances give thanks. And there's a little picture. So focus. There we go. The church's past is rich. And God uses lots of ways to gather his people. And his people don't always like the other ways that other people are benefiting from. But I think it's God's business, how he's managing this. It'll be really interesting to see what you have to say to this video. I know some of you are going to go off at the seeker stuff. And because, of course, I really do have to make a video about how the Emergent, how Peugeot, I mentioned it in the last video, how the Emergent sort of sets the table for Jonathan Peugeot and everything that would come. So, all right, that's enough for this. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think.